Today, we are in a series called One Hit Wonders, and this is interesting for me. A one-hit wonder is a song that an artist released that was like a smash hit, and it would end up going on to be that artist's only smash hit. So it's called a one-hit wonder, and we're taking titles of some of those songs, and we're kind of building messages just off that idea using the scripture. And so that's what we're here to do today, but it's interesting for me because I don't know anything about music, and I get made fun of in the office a lot because they're like working in song lyrics just in mid-conversation, and I'm just so oblivious to all of it. And they're like, "Did you catch that?" I'm like, "No, what song was that?" And then they're like going back and forth, and I'm like, I just don't know anything. So when he asked me to preach this, I'm like, dude, I don't know any one-hit wonders. Can y'all give me some options? And he played this one, and I was like, I think I have heard that one before, and so I'll take it, and let's see if you know it too. It's Aha, it's Take On Me. Anyone know that song? Okay, that's pretty good. All right, y'all know more than me because I had no idea. All right, and so that's the idea today, Take On Me. And here's the question I want to answer as we jump into today. I want to answer the question, how do we get into heaven? How do you and I get into heaven? How does the world get into heaven? How many of you would agree that's an important question to be able to answer? When eternity's hanging in the balance, we've got to be able to know the answer to this question. Heaven, the place where God is, the place where God's throne is, the place that we have been taught all of our lives, where there is no more pain, no more suffering, no more death. How do we get there? John the Revelator, he wrote the book of Revelation. He was one of the apostles of Jesus. Jesus had died on the cross, risen from the dead. 40 days later, he ascended into heaven. 10 days after that was the day of Pentecost when the Holy Spirit came. And John was filled with the Holy Spirit, along with many other apostles at that day in Jerusalem. And it began a lifelong, which John had already began it, but it spurred him on to use the rest of his life to actually spread the gospel of Jesus. And he was so effective at it that he was agitating the Romans. Church history would teach us that they tried to boil him in water or boil him in oil just to do away with him. And so you study church history and stuff, this is not like in the Bible, it's just been written in some historical documents that he was miraculously saved from the oil. And so the Romans just got fed up with him and sent him to an island off the coast of Greece called Patmos. Just like, I'm done with this guy, he obviously is not going to die, we're just going to send him away so we don't have to deal with him anymore. And it was on that island called Patmos that John got a vision, and he wrote the entire book of Revelation from that vision. And he talks about how the place where heaven is currently is not going to be the eternal place where heaven is. Heaven is in a place right now where God is, where God's throne is. When we become absent from the body, we go be present with the Lord where he is in heaven. But there's going to be a series of events that unfold that surround the coming of Jesus and the events that are going to come with that, which, by the way, we ought to peel our eyes a little bit more after what's been happening in the Middle East and just be ready because here it comes. But there's going to be a day surrounding those events where God's going to take the place where heaven currently is and he's going to relocate it. And he's going to make a brand new heaven. He's going to make a brand new earth. That's going to be the eternal resting place for those who are in relationship with Jesus Christ. And I don't know about you, but man, I really want to spend eternity right there. And John goes on to talk about this place. It's called the New Jerusalem. And in Revelation 21 and Revelation 22, he writes 5 or 6 verses that we're going to read right here to begin to get a visual for what this place is really going to look like. We'll start in Revelation chapter 21. John said, I heard a loud shout from the throne saying, look, God's home is now among his people. He will live with them. They will be his people. God himself will be with them. Verse 4, he will wipe every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death, no more sorrow, no more crying, no more pain. All these things are gone for how long? Forever. How many of you are thankful for that? It's amazing news for us. And John continues in the very last chapter of the Bible, Revelation chapter 22. He's trying to put words into what he is seeing in this vision. Let's go to verse 1. Then the angel showed me a river with the water of life. It was clear as crystal, flowing from the throne of God and of the Lamb. Verse 2, it flowed down the center of the main street. On each side of the river grew a tree of life, bearing 12 crops of fruit, with a fresh crop each month. The leaves were used for medicine to heal the nations. Verse 3, no longer will there be a curse upon anything, for the throne of God and of the Lamb will be there, and his servants will worship him. Verse 4, They will see his face, and his name will be written on their foreheads. Final verse right here. There will be no night there. No need for lamps, no need for even the sun. Why? Because the Lord God will shine on them, and they will reign there forever and ever. John's describing, with the best language he can develop, what he is seeing as the New Jerusalem, which will be the eternal resting place of those people who have had their sins forgiven and are in a relationship with Jesus Christ. And today I want to answer the question, how do we get there? You ready? You ready? Yes. If not, you will be in a minute, because I'm going ready whether you're ready or not. If we go back to the beginning, we're just here in Revelation chapter 22. We've literally got to span the whole Bible. That's the last chapter. We've got to go back to the first chapter, when man was made in God's image. We have heard of this. Many of us that were raised in church have heard that you were made in the image of God, but really, what does it mean? The word image in the Hebrew is selim, which translates statue. And so if we read it that way, man that was made in God's image is actually saying man is a statue of God. Now, what's a statue you think of when you kind of just picture a statue? What's the first one that comes to mind? Abraham Lincoln. Okay, we had a few more. Here's the first one I thought of. Go to this one right here. How about this one? Statue of Liberty. Anybody seen it with their own eyes? All right, we have several. If you go into Battery Park and look over South Manhattan and the Hudson River, there she stands. It was a gift to the French from us to celebrate our newfound liberty and independence. And it was put there in the Hudson River to be a reminder for anyone who would see a photo of it or see it with their own eyes. It was a reminder of the independence that had come to America, of the independence that we could now celebrate as a nation. Let's go to this next one. Maybe you've seen this one before in Rio de Janeiro. Christ the Redeemer stands atop Rio as a beacon, as a statue, as a reminder to everyone who sees a photo of it or sees it in person that Christ actually has come to redeem and save his people. We look at this one. Maybe you've seen it before. Martin Luther King Jr., Washington, D.C. Incredible place to go and walk and just see memorials and statues. Martin Luther King Jr., just an incredible one right here, as a reminder of who he is, what he fought for, and how our world is different because of what he fought for. We have another one here that might be familiar, the statue that we know today as Iwo Jima, that when we look at it, it reminds us of that battle that was fought out in the Pacific Ocean several hundred miles off the eastern coast of Japan. The island was called Iwo Jima, and we can look at that statue and be reminded of the time that Americans invaded that island to position us to be able to attack the Japanese mainland during World War II. What's my point with all of this? Statues, when we see them, remind us of a person or an event. What's this next one right here? Maybe this one will be familiar to some of you. I asked one of my students, we were talking about this and having a conversation. I was like, what's the first statue that comes to mind? He was like, Nick Saban. I was like, oh man, okay. All right. So we started chatting through that, and I think it still stands. We can look at this statue of Coach Saban and be reminded of what he did and who he was. He's not trying to say he's not here, he's still alive, but who he was as a coach for the University of Alabama. This one's a little bit closer to home here, Nakalula. We can see the statue and be reminded that there was once a girl who jumped to her death because she did not want to marry the person that her parents had arranged for her to marry. Why did we have all of that fun we just had? Because statues, when we see them, remind us of a person and of a story. If we were made in the image of God, which translates statue, we are all statues in the earth, so that everyone who sees us would be able to see us and see him, because our lives are an ever-present reminder of who he is and what he's done. We are statues in the earth. And when God made us in his image from the very beginning of time, he had a dream that we would be positioned throughout the earth and we would feel it, so that creation and all of humanity would never be able to experience a day not realizing who he is and what he's done, because they would just see us and be reminded all over again. This is employers, this is employees, this is friends, this is family, man. They ought to see us and see him. They ought to be without excuse. They ought to know God, who he is and what he's done, just because they ran into me today. It's what it means to be made in the image of God, to be a statue in the earth that points to his person and his story. But we know very quickly, 2 chapters later, that although man was made in the image of God, although man was a statue in the earth that would represent God, that image soon got disfigured. It got marred when sin came into the world and we didn't look like him anymore. No, not even close. He was righteous. He was holy. Now we were wicked and we had sin. We were no longer right-looking statues to represent God in the earth. If you look at Genesis 4, the very next chapter, sin had begun to take such a toll that Cain got mad and jealous and killed his brother Abel. You look at Genesis 5, it's the genealogy. You look at Genesis 6, wickedness had spread throughout the earth so rampantly that God literally said, go read it yourself in Genesis 6, that he was sorry that he made man, and he was grieved in his heart. So what did he do about it? The chapter turns to Genesis 7, and God decides, hey, this wickedness is too much. I need to cleanse the earth once and for all. So he causes rain to fall from the heavens for 40 days and water to erupt from the earth for 40 days, and it created what we know today as a worldwide flood that would purge the earth of its wickedness. But he didn't wipe the whole earth out, did he? He raised up one man because that man had found grace in the sight of God. The man's name was Noah. Noah spent 100 years building that ark. People thought he was a fool, but I promise when those waters erupted from beneath and came from the top, y'all ever seen that movie, Evan Almighty? It's kind of a funny picture of how it probably looked to the people around him as Noah was building the ark for literally a century. Waters were on the earth 4.5 months, and Noah and his family finally come off of the ark, and God decides to start fresh. He gives Noah the same command he gave Adam. Hey, I want you to be fruitful. I want you to multiply. I want you to fill the earth. I want you to be my image in the earth. Statues, the whole world needs to look at you and see me and what I've done because they've seen you. The big question is, would wickedness take its toll like it did in Genesis 3, or would righteousness actually prevail this time? And if you've read the story any length of time, you just turn from Genesis 7 to Genesis 8, and it's like what just happened again as wickedness is back on the earth. Genesis 8, Genesis 9, Genesis 10. By Genesis 11, 200 years had gone by since the flood. And man was so wicked and rebellious against God that they built a tower called Babel that would become a symbol of their rebellion, a symbol of their unity against God. They thought they had enough material that they could build a tower that would take them to heaven. For 100 years, they stood together building that tower. Could you imagine working on one project for 100 years? That's what they gave their lives to for 100 years. After a century had gone by, God visited the wickedness of the people. They only spoke one language at this time. But when God visited, he stirred up the languages of the earth. Can you imagine being in the middle of this project, communicating with people on how to attach this wood and weld this metal, however all that went on back then, and all of a sudden you're mid-sentence and your language switches over and no one can talk to each other. Can you imagine the chaos, the utter frustration that would happen on a project like that? Well, it drove them nuts, obviously, because God finally got what he wanted from the very beginning. They finally scattered and began to fill the earth because they couldn't communicate with anybody anymore, so they separated with their own people groups. Wickedness was prevailing. We keep going. If y'all good with some of this morning, if we keep going throughout the Old Testament, we see two things happening. There's some people that are living for God, and there's some people that are not. I think about the people that really tried to give God their lives and honor him. They're having to fight against the grain because wickedness is only growing rampant more and more. Some of these people over here that really were trying to honor God with their lives, and God would go on to use them greatly. We talked about Noah. How about Moses? How about Aaron? How about Joshua and Caleb? How about Rahab? How about, we keep going to David. We go to Solomon. We go to Elijah and Elisha. We could keep going to Deborah and to Ruth and to Gideon. We could talk about all of these people that worked against the grain to be sure that God could use their lives for his glory. But while they're trying to do that and trying to honor God, there's cruelty that's advancing in the earth. There is sexual immorality. There is debauchery, hatred, jealousy, anger, murder, all of it. Wickedness is rampant. By the end of the Old Testament, God sends 5 major prophets, and I believe it's 13 minor prophets, because he wanted the world to see what he thought about the condition of the earth. And so he sent prophets, and he would speak through those prophets who would write this down and tell a nation what God was thinking. Here's what the prophet Jeremiah said when he came on to the scene in Jeremiah 17. This was God's analysis of humanity's heart. Verse 9, the human heart is the most deceitful of all things and desperately wicked. Who even knows how bad that it is? Isaiah was another prophet that would come onto the scene and reveal God's heart for humanity and the landscape and the wickedness that had prevailed. Let's go on to Isaiah 64. Isaiah said we're all infected and impure with sin. When we put our righteous deeds on display, they are nothing but what? Filthy rags. Like autumn leaves, we wither and we fall, and our sins sweep us away like the wind. This is what God thought about the wickedness that was on the earth. Hosea chapter 4 is another prophet. He said, "Hear the word of the Lord, O people of Israel. The Lord has brought charges against you, saying there is no faithfulness, no kindness, no knowledge of God in your land. You make vows and you break them. You kill, you steal, you commit adultery. There is violence everywhere, one murder after another." This is a brutal analysis that God is giving of the spiritual wickedness that is in the land. The question is, what's God going to do about it? What did he do last time wickedness had covered the earth? He just decided to wipe it. Could God have decided to wipe it again once and for all this time? He absolutely could have. Would he have been just in deciding to cleanse the earth and purge it of humanity once and for all? He would have been just. By the end of the Old Testament, Malachi, who's the final prophet, this is the very last chapter of the Old Testament, Malachi makes an announcement that's going to tell all of humanity what God's going to do about it. The Lord of heaven's armies says, which that's just quite the title, you know what I'm saying? Like if you're wondering who he is, the Lord of heaven's armies says to you, the day of judgment is coming, burning like a furnace. On that day, the arrogant and the wicked will be burned up like straw. They will be consumed, roots, branches, and all. It's not a good thing to hear the Lord of heaven's army say to you, is it? As a wicked person, one who has sin. Romans says that there is a price to sin. Does anyone know what that price is? Death. God would have been absolutely just in giving us what we deserved. But what would he do? What would he decide to do? Y'all ever flip to this page in your Bible? It's the blank page between the Old Testament and the New Testament. Don't just skip over it next time you finish Malachi 4. Look at it and understand what it means. This blank page represents 400 years where God said nothing through the prophets. 400 years. Humanity's left with that command and that judgment from Malachi, wondering, okay, there's judgment coming. We're all going to be burned up. When's it coming? And God doesn't say anything else through a prophet for 400 years. Now, 400 years is a long time. We don't just need to blow by that. Next year, America celebrates 250 years since its independence in 1776. And the late 1700s feels like ancient history to all of us in here today, doesn't it? We're talking 400 years where God did not say anything and left humanity on edge, wondering what would be next. Some are wondering, is God going to come and save us like he promised that he would? Some are wondering, when is this judgment coming and how do I avoid it? But people did not know what was going to be next. What would God do? Well, I'll tell you what God would do. Something so extraordinary that was what was least expected. Something that would answer the call once and for all. Instead of making mankind pay for that sin, he would actually come and pay for it himself. It's a bizarre story. It's called the gospel. Instead of making us, humanity, the human race that was born in his image but had become disfigured, they didn't look like him anymore. And throughout the Old Testament, it's so wicked that, man, they were almost unrecognizable. Instead of making them, which is you and me, pay the penalty for that sin and that wickedness, he chose to send his only son to come and to pay that penalty for us. And it's extraordinary news for us because when Jesus came, he came through the birth canal of a virgin, lived 33 years. And in those 33 years, he actually never sinned. Hebrews 4 talks about it right here. This high priest of ours who's talking about Jesus, he understands our weaknesses. Why? Because he faced all of them. Yet the only difference between him and us is what? He didn't sin. He stood there at the end of his life facing execution, year 33, without sin. Now, if he was going to pay the punishment for sin, something had to happen because he was without sin. Although he achieved righteousness every day of his life, he actually had to take the sin of mankind, that's you and that's me, that's Adam, all the way through to us, had to take the sin of mankind and place it on himself. And when he placed it on himself, he stood before God, and God looked at him as someone who was representing us, as someone who was sin cursed in the flesh. And the Romans began a brutal process called the crucifixion. And what was happening is the filthy rags of our righteousness, our best resume of our best works that's really just filth before God, were placed on him. My rebellion, the rebellion of people from Babel, the rebellion of us today were placed on him. They were crushed into his head with a crown of thorns. They were spiked through his wrist and through his ankles, and he bore the sin of all humanity on himself. And as he's hanging on the cross, something extraordinary happens in Matthew 27 where God, the Father, looks at his only Son and sees that sin has come upon him. He didn't sin, but he was wearing the sin of us. And God the Father looks at him carrying the sin of humanity. And what does God do? God does this right here. God literally had to turn his back. Jesus felt the agony of that moment because he cried out, my God, why have you what? Forsaken me. I'll tell you why God forsook him. So he wouldn't have to forsake us. He chose to turn his back on his only Son who had become sin personified so that he wouldn't have to turn his back on me and you today. So he wouldn't have to turn his back on me and you for all of eternity. Isaiah 52, I believe it is, talks about this moment where Jesus is on the cross. Verse 14 says, but many were amazed when they saw him. Picture yourself standing at the base of the hill looking up at the cross. Many were amazed when they saw him. Why? His face was so disfigured. He seemed hardly even human. And from his appearance, one would scarcely know that they couldn't even tell he was a man. This is what we need to hear today. Humanity, although they were born in the image of God, had taken on a disfigured form. We didn't look like him anymore. We were marred. We were messed up. In order for Jesus to pay the price for that, he literally had to become disfigured himself. He became disfigured and marred in the physical because we had become disfigured and marred in the spiritual. We were messed up and didn't look like the image that God had created us in. So Jesus himself had to take that form of what we had become on himself so that the price could be fully paid. Can I say it this way as a pun to kind of the title in that song we referenced earlier today? He took on us. Can I make it personal? Maybe you can make it personal yourself. He took on me. It's what he did. It's what he chose to do, man. It was a choice. An agonizing choice, but at the same time, a joyful choice, which really doesn't make sense. And man, we'll have to spend a lifetime kind of unpacking that phrase right there. How was it joy? I'll tell you how it was joy. It was joy because he saw this day. The day where me and you'd be sitting here in Cornerstone Church in Gadsden, Alabama as people that could be redeemed, as people that could be saved and not separated from God anymore. He saw this day. And so he said, I will go through any agony with joy. Hebrews says, for the joy set before him, he endured the cross. There was joy in him. There was something he was excited about, something that was on the horizon that he couldn't help but fix his eyes on. And that was the day when you and I could be reunited with him. It's why God separated from him on the cross so he wouldn't have to separate from you and me today. 2 Corinthians 5, if you would, Jonathan. This is the reality of the gospel today. God made Jesus, if we can read it that way. He made him as God made Jesus, who knew no sin, to become sin for us. That's the cross. That's him wearing my sin. That's him wearing your sin. He had to become sin so he could pay the price for sin. But why? So that you and me could become his righteousness. Jesus never sinned one day in his life, but he took sin and he paid the price. But the righteousness that he achieved every day of those 33 years of his life are now available to you and available to me. He made him who knew no sin to become sin for us so that we could become the righteousness of God. And in the same way that Jesus clothed himself in our sin, he wants to clothe us in his righteousness. Why? Because there's going to be a day where you and I stand before God and we're going to see that same God that was there in the garden in Genesis 1. that was there for the fall of man in Genesis 3. He was there when Cain killed Abel in Genesis 2. He was there at the flood in Genesis 6, 7, and 8. He was at Babel in Genesis 11. He walked with all of these people. We're going to see him with our own eyes, and it's going to be an extraordinary moment. It'll be a moment that's one of two things. One, it'll be the worst day of your life because you're going to stand before him clothed in your own sin, which is filth. And he's holy and he's righteous, and he can't have anything to do with sin. So he's going to say to depart from him because he never knew you. Option two, if we want to get into heaven, what has to happen is we have to get the righteousness of Jesus and be clothed in it. Why? Because he's going to look at us and not see the filth of our own righteousness, but he's going to see the righteousness of Jesus that has been attributed to us. We didn't do anything to earn it. Here's all we had to do. You ready for it? All we had to do was put our faith and our trust in him. And that's a real churchy phrase, but here's what it means. It's not me saying, hey, God, I have my life and I'd like you to be a part of it. That's not salvation at all. It's not conversion at all. It's not I have my stuff and I like my stuff, but I'm cool with you being part of this. No way, man. Salvation, you saying yes to God, you getting the righteousness of Jesus on your life is you saying, here's my life and I like a lot of things about it and I hate a lot of things about it, but I'll just take all of it and I give it to you because I trust you with what you think is best for me. And I want to follow you. I want you to be Lord. Lord means to govern. I want you to govern my life for the rest of my days. As many days as you give me, whether it's tomorrow or whether it's 60 years from now, all of them are yours. And I want to honor you with my life. And what happens in that moment is something spectacular. The righteousness of Jesus, although you were a sinner, a wretch, wicked and rebellious, comes on your life. Psalm 103 says what happens. He literally takes our sin and he casts them as far as the east is from where? The west. It's an immeasurable distance. We don't have a tape measure that can reach that far. But he takes them and he just casts them as far from the east is from the west. And then we get to exclaim what Isaiah exclaimed in chapter 61. He said, I'm overwhelmed with joy in the Lord my God. Why? Because he's dressed me with clothing of salvation and he's draped me in a robe of righteousness. And that becomes true for all of us the moment that we confess our sin and we give our lives, the rest of our lives, to his lordship and to his honor. He took on us so that we could take on him. He took on our filth so we could take on his perfection. He took our sin so that we could take his righteousness. Will you stand to your feet with me? I just want to have a moment where we can just get real thankful, man. The worst thing that can happen in moments like this is, oh, here's the church, here's the cross again, no. I am so convinced that we need to hear this every day of our lives, because if we don't remind ourselves what he has done, we will quickly grow distant from it. So I want to give us a moment right here just to get really thankful for the cross. Maybe you haven't told God how thankful you are for the cross recently. Maybe you've given your life to him and you're walking with him, but you've just kind of grown distant from him. I want you to bow your heads right now, and this is your moment to thank him, to return, to let him know how much you appreciate what he's done, to honor him. Maybe you're in here today, and when I asked that question to begin service, it's like, how do we get into heaven? Maybe that jumped at you because you really want to know how to get there, and you've been battling that. You want your eternity to be what John talked about at Patmos. What needs to happen in you today is you need to place your faith and your trust in Jesus, because when you do, it's the only way that his righteousness is going to come on your life. So as we begin to sing this song, I'm going to pray here in just a second. When we begin to sing this song, that's going to be your opportunity. If you're in here today saying, hey, that's me, I'm ready to give my life to him, that's going to be your moment just to say, God, I want to give my entire life to you, and I want you to clothe me in the righteousness of Jesus. Just begin to pray that way, and God's going to do it.